Hey everybody, it's Liz. We've been having a little bit of an Instagram issue. I'm trying to bring on the great Dr. Michelle Harper, the author of the beautiful new New York Times bestselling memoir, The Beauty in Breaking. If you guys love me and you want to help me out, a really great thing that you could do right now is not send me requests to join live, because I only want a request from her. If you guys send me requests that kind of, hi again. Hi, Glow Maven. Yes, so unless your name is Dr. Michelle Harper, don't send me a request. This will make it as easy as possible for her to do. This is her very first time doing an Instagram Live, and we're gonna try to make it as smooth as possible for her. It's nice to see all your faces. Hello and welcome, everybody. Here we go. I think I got her. Yes! It's happening. It's happening.
Did it? Oh, I'm so sorry, but thank you. Oh my God.
You did it.
Finally. Sorry, I'm holding my phone, so.
That's it.
Sorry for anyone with motion sickness or seizures. Sorry.
If anyone with motion sickness or seizures, please speak to your doctor before joining this Instagram Live. Unfortunately, your doctor is right here on the line with us. Michelle, this is an example of what my friend Claudia Doyle says. We can do hard things, but we can't do easy things.
Exactly.
You managed to get yourself through Harvard Medical School and become a New York Times bestselling author, but getting on Instagram Live is hard. It's hard.
Victory.
So here you are. It's so lovely to see you. Thank you for coming. And everybody, please meet the wonderful Dr. Michelle Harper. She's the author of this extraordinary and beautiful new memoir. It's called The Beauty in Breaking. It's her story of being an ER doctor at this moment in American history, but it's so much more than just a kind of thrilling and devastating story of life on the front lines of the medical profession. It's also a story of personal devastation and healing and empathy. And I think it's actually also, in a very quiet but heart-destroying way, a story of how we have failed our fellow human beings so much in this culture, in a way that you are able to see in much closer up than many of us. So I thank you for this book. It's extraordinary. I'm so honored that you're joining us today. And hello.
Hello. Wonderful to meet live.
Very, very wonderful to meet live. So I wanted to just start off by, first of all, saying that I had no idea until I read your book and started to do research on you that you are one of a very small community of Black female doctors in the United States of America, and that percentage is actually somewhere around 2% of the medical doctors in our country are Black women. That shocked me. I don't know why it should have. You'd think that I would gotten past the point of being shocked by racism and by marginalization of Black women. But I wondered if you could speak to that directly in your experience, what that's been like for you, what your experience has been like. I know that's a very broad question, but I just wanted to begin there.
Yeah, thank you. And I feel it on a daily basis because typically I'm the only Black female and the only Black doctor in the department. So I know it to be true, but even when I hear that percentage, it's heartbreaking for me also. Just how low that number is. There was no need for it. There's no reason for it. It is part of marginalization, as you talked about, in structural racism. And what it feels like often is being in the throes of things, unfortunately unsupported. I've had so many experiences where, well, like recently, where a woman wanted to make a police report because she had been assaulted. I was a young Black woman, and she had asked for the police to be called. She wanted to be seen by me for a head injury, but also wanted to make the report because this friend of a friend assaulted her. And so I was just doing what I was doing in the department. She was waiting to be seen, and all of a sudden I hear screaming. And I hear screaming, and it's becoming more frequent. and more anxiety ridden to a fever pitch. And she's saying, get out, I want you to leave. So I'm looking around the department. No one's moving. No one's doing anything. I was a little confused because it sounded like her, but she had come into the department alone. So finally, when no one's doing anything, I say to the nurse, do you want to check on her? What is the problem? And the nurse said, no, the police are in there. So, and then she went back to drinking her soda.
Whoa.
And I was like, that to me is more concerning.
Right.
I get up and rush to the room, and a police officer was there, and she was scared. And I physically put my body between her and the police officer. And I didn't know exactly what was going on, but I knew that she was not under arrest. She was trying to make a report, and I asked him to leave. It got very tense, and ultimately he did leave. And then she relayed to me how he's always in her neighborhood. He's always harassing her and the other people in the neighborhood. And she's just so tired. And she dissolved into tears, and she was scared and she was upset. And I told her I was there to take care of her, and I wouldn't let him come back, and I will take care of her injuries, and we're going to get through this. And when I left the room, I was told by my colleague that the police officer said he was going to come back to arrest me for interfering in an investigation. And there were many terrible parts about this, but one of the terrible things that no one else responded, the only Black doctor, all of the nurses were white, my colleague was, no one else felt the need to respond or intervene for her or for me, actually. And it has a happy ending. She was fine. I didn't get arrested, but that's often what it's like. And it's, I'm reminded that it's not just my responsibility. I may have a sensitivity for it. I may understand it. I may see it, but that's for all of us to not let injustice happen, to first do no harm, to honor our duty, to heal, protect, and to stand up when the moment is called for.
That's a horrifying story, and it reminds me of another horrifying story that you tell in your book about the time when a man was brought in by the police, shackled, and they said he had swallowed drugs during a drug raid, and they wanted you to forcibly cause him to pass those drugs as evidence for them. What it reminds me of in this case is a very severe disconnect between how the white people in the room regarded the police, and how you in the room regarded the police, and how this woman who had been assaulted regarded the police. When the nurse said to you in this most recent story that you just shared, she's fine, there's a police officer in there, that just expresses to me everything that white people think the police are for, which is like, oh, they're, everything's fine, there's a police officer there. And that was obviously not her experience or yours. And in this other case, there was an attempt to coerce you to force a patient against his will to have a medical procedure. And everyone in the department was fine with that, for the same reason of this deeply, you write so beautifully about, and so devastatingly about, this deeply internalized paternalistic trust of a white police officer where, well, he said so, right? Like, he said so, so we have to do it. In fact, and you were informed by your colleagues, we always do this. But the very clear medical ethic is that you are not allowed to commit medical practices on a conscious and sane patient who doesn't want them. And that has to come first in a hospital. And so I was just thinking about how many times you must in your career bump up against this issue where, while you're the doctor on duty, the ethics and the safety of the patient are what is required. And yet, when you're in the emergency room, you must constantly be running into the police, some of whom are your friends. You talk also about the very convivial relationship, congenial and protective relationship that you had with many police officers when you worked in the South Bronx at one of the poorest hospitals in the country, if not the poorest. Yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't have a question. I'm just saying that it's so important. Most of my followers are white women, and I really want you to listen to this because it's so important for us to see the ways that we don't instinctively think to protect the Black person in the room when there's a police officer there. And in fact, just assume that that if there's a white policeman there, everything is fine. And we should know by now that that is not the case, especially in the policing of people of color.
It's true. And you know, and the other example you brought up of Dominic, where they wanted me to force an examination on him, that could also incur a lot of risk, physical harm, physical injury.
Right.
In that story, not only was he not considered to have any personal sovereignty, bodily integrity, but my resident, so I was the doctor in charge, she's my resident, so technically she's my student. My trainee called hospital ethics and legal department to see if she could override my decision, because not only was he not seen to have any authority or sovereignty, but neither was I in that situation. And so that was another situation where we have to look at the ways we're complicit. When I say where, I mean the medical establishment. Definitely issues with the police, definitely issues in medicine as well. We've seen that throughout time. I mean, these are sadly hardwired issues in every industry. And I always, I tell these stories, I always say the point is not just to break hearts and depress people, but so that we have a chance to examine these issues and then act. That's really what these are opportunities for us to choose better, do better, be better.
I want to go back to that after a certain point, but I want to also say that your book, just for anybody who's listening, clearly is not just here to depress people and break hearts. It didn't do either for me. It's a spiritual book. In many levels, I felt it to be an almost mystical book, and we can talk about that a little bit as well. It's a deeply humane book. It's a brave book, and it's exquisitely well written. Please read this. It's poetic. It's stark in certain points because the realities are stark, but it's a tremendously beautiful and important work of art. In addition to being, in many ways, an indictment not just against the current state of medicine in America, but against this culture itself and how we treat the most marginal, vulnerable of people. I wanted to. Oh, you're holding your phone in your hand. Is it going to be awkward for you to read?
Doesn't matter. I'm good.
Okay. She's an ER doc. She can do many difficult things at once.
Doc, and I do yoga. So
I believe in you, Michelle. If you can sign on to Instagram Live, you can do anything. For those of you who are just joining us, and I did turn off the comments so that we could actually just focus on your words, because I know that the comments roll over your face, and I want everybody to be able to see your face and hear your words. We are discussing, for those of you who are just joining us, this beautiful book, The Beauty in Breaking by Dr. Michelle Harper. And I've asked her if she would read from the introduction of her book so that you could just get a little sense of her background and her childhood and what led her into becoming an emergency room doctor. So I'll let you take it from there.
As I cradled my patient's head in my hand, I looked past the watery wells of his eyes. For a moment, I didn't notice the blood that ran in rivulets across my gloves as it poured from his scalp, or the bits of gray and white brain matter dotted the sheets. The beeping of the monitors around me, the popping sound of IV catheter tops being flicked off by the nurses, the screeching of wheels as equipment was dragged across linoleum floors, the nurses and techs yelling directions at one another, the stifled gasps erupting from the two medical students in the first ER shift, attempting in vain not to be startled. All were drowned out as I stood over this young man and tried to ease his agitation. This is the part of being a doctor that medical school doesn't cover, that case reviews don't prepare you for. This is the part you can't really know until you're in the moment. You are the person responsible for saving the human that slowly slips through your fingers, silently begging for final redemption under the demanding fluorescent lights. I am the doctor whose palms bolster the head of the 20-year-old man with gunshot in his brain. I support the baby as she takes her first breath outside her mother's womb. I hug the wife whose husband is dying from advanced liver disease. She implores the universe to take away his pain. I claim no special powers, nor do I know how to handle death any better than you. What I know is that for 36 hours a week, I reside in the melee that is a hospital emergency room, where I'm called upon to be salve, antidote, and sometimes Charon. Most of the time, my job is to keep death at bay, When I am successful, I send the patient back out into the world. When I'm not, I am there as life passes away. I'm not so deluded as to think that I alone am capable of making that kind of difference. I'm well aware that the determination of who lives and who dies doesn't have my hands alone. There are times when, despite the designs of any patient, family member, friend, or doctor, death will come. Then I am witness. What I can do is be the fairy woman who holds the body as the last breath escapes. The one who, like the night sentinel, calls out the hour and does her best to convey that all is well. Like everyone, I am in this world for only a brief time, and as for many, blessings abound in my life, and they abound amid the struggle, amid my struggle. Over the decades, I've learned to cultivate a personal state of stillness. As a child, that stillness grew from a dissociation I stumbled upon that allowed me to better endure a life with a father who was a batterer and with a family legacy. As a Black woman, I navigate an American landscape that claims to be post-racial when every waking moment reveals the contrary. An American landscape that requires all women to pound tenaciously against the proverbial glass ceiling, which we've since discovered is made of palladium, the kind of glass that would sooner bow than shatter. When I began writing this book, I had started over. My marriage to my college sweetheart had ended. I had moved to a new city to start a new job. Plagued with doubt, I find myself having to reevaluate my life. Living through such changes was difficult. Now I see those junctures, when everything I had counted on came to an abrupt end, as a privilege. It gave me the opportunity to be uncertain, and in that uncertainty grew opportunity.
Thank you so much. It's a little unfair that you're a very talented, Harvard-educated doctor and also such a good writer. Little bit unfair that you got both of those skills. I want to speak to you a little bit more about your upbringing. You speak so eloquently in this book about how you've worked in some of the most dangerous neighborhoods and some of the most impoverished communities in the country, from veterans hospitals to very underserved neighborhoods in the South Bronx. You've seen more violence and death and pain in your job than most of us will ever know unless we're on the front lines of a war, and probably even more medics. I don't know whether they've seen as much as you've seen. And you grew up with violence. You didn't grow up with, you make a very important distinction in the book between public violence and private violence. You didn't grow up with public violence. You grew up in a very safe neighborhood, in a very affluent neighborhood in Washington, D.C. You went to a fine private school. You lived in a really beautiful house. Your father was a physician. And yet within that house, there was an enormous amount of danger and violence from your father to your mother and to your sibling and yourself. I wondered as I was reading it whether you think that you would have become an emergency room doctor or a doctor at all if you hadn't had to experience being a helpless child, watching people get hurt, if that somehow had something to do with your life choices at that level.
100%. I mean, I'm sure I would have gone into I probably would have gone into like civil rights law or something, but I feel that I was groomed, that my upbringing groomed for emergency medicine. It was so uncertain all the time. All you had was a snapshot. You had to see a situation and make a decision in the moment. Okay, is this life threatening? Is it likely to blow over? Or is it probably fine, nothing will happen right now, which is what I have to do in the ER. And being in that situation where people were always being hurt made me feel that I wanted to be there to, I talk about when a pivotal moment when I went to the ER and I was there with my brother who was getting help for an injury, and how just seeing how all manner of life converges there, whether it's a homeless man who's just looking for just a respite from the elements, just needs a place to sleep in a chair for minutes or hours, or a little girl who has a cut and her father's bringing her in, or the more extreme examples, and elderly patient who's coding, their heart stops, and medics are pumping air into their lungs, pumping their chest so their heart will beat for them. Everyone comes here looking for something, looking for healing, looking for a chance to leave better. So I know that my upbringing brought me to that point where, for me, I recognized that. It resonated with me, and I wanted to offer that to people.
The primary code of honor within a dysfunctional, abusive household is never tell the world what happens inside these walls. You must never tell our secrets to anybody. Now, that's exactly the opposite of what it means to write a memoir. So I wanted to talk to you about that. You broke the number one rule of dysfunctional and violent and abusive homes, which is, don't ever, I mean, once in your life you called the police when you were a child because you really did in that moment think that somebody was going to be killed. They didn't help. As you said in the book, you discovered that day that there was no law here, that no one was coming to save you. But now you've told the family secrets in public. And I want you to talk about this because a lot of the people who follow my page are writers or aspiring writers. And that probably the number one question that I get, apart from how can I get an agent and how can I get an editor, is what do you do about the truth? Like, what do you do? How much do you tell? How much do you withhold? Who do you protect? How do you know when it's time? How do you deal with the blowback that might come from that? And so just writer to writer, I had that question for you about the memoir.
I will say that when I didn't have to face it so much initially, because when I started writing this book, it was more of a passion project and I didn't know what would happen. I did. And then I said, well, I've written it. I should try and get it published. And so it was the moment when it was sold that I thought, what have I done?
Yeah.
People might read this and then what am I going to do? But as I was editing and writing, for me, it was a spiritual process. We talked about how the book is mystical. So I approached it. It was really my intention to approach it with a lot of reverence. I felt it was important for me to tell the truth, to not lie, to not sugarcoat either. But I made it a point to tell my story. And when it came to people in my life, I would tell just enough to tell my truth. So there are parts of other people's story I left out because I felt it wasn't fair. They're not part of this process. They're not going to be speaking publicly. I didn't want to violate their privacy by making choices for them they may not be comfortable with. Right. So I feel that holding that line in that respect was helpful. That being said, yes, there's blowback. Ooh, there's blowback. Some of the phone calls I'm getting from my aunt, for example, who's been such a support system. I mean, she's having to support my mother through this process. I mean, it's hard, but I made a decision that I was going to break the code of silence, that I was brave enough to do it. And because I'm committed to the truth, I'm committed to the mission of healing. That was most important. I did realize I could lose people in the process. And I also decided that I was fine with that because I was going to, like I say, like that glass house, I was going to shatter it. The walls would come down and I'm strong enough to do it. So I will do it. And this book is my offering to other people who may not have the strength right now, that it could help them, even if it was privately, quietly in their homes, that they would know they're not alone and be supported through their process. Maybe one day they will be strong. Maybe they will take those hard stands as well and then be there for other people. That for me is important. So I was willing to face whatever blowback comes.
And lo, it has come.
Yeah. And you know what? I think also that that's an opportunity for other people. There's some of them are following us now, but I've heard from my father. When the book was coming out, I heard from him less. I do believe it dawned on him that, there's his whole side of the family. He's never told why he's not really in contact with his children. I'm sure they've suspected, but he hasn't told them because I asked him, Do they know? Have you told them? Because this book is coming out, and I'm pretty sure some of them will hear about it.
Right.
Some have. They've contacted me on Facebook. They friended me. They're buying the book. So it's an opportunity for him too to
Yeah.
face on in a more public way. It's kind of a reckoning.
I think the most important thing I heard you say in all of that was when you said that the book was a spiritual assignment. I put the word assignment in your mouth, but that it was, you took it on as a spiritual undertaking. And just for anybody who's out there wondering whether they're allowed to tell the story that you're not allowed to tell, you know, my suggestion would be, there are two books. There's the book that you have to write for your soul to be free. And then there's the book that you can publish. And so I think sometimes people get so tangled up in worrying about the book, what's going to happen when the book gets published, that they don't actually write the book that they have to write. So the first draft, and believe me, the first draft of Eat, Pray, Love has a lot of stuff in it that you guys didn't read. You know, the first draft has to take everything out of you, you know, and then once you've done that, your soul is already in the process of healing from finally being able to tell those truths. And then you can go through and decide, you know, make your own choices about what can go out there in the world or not. But I'm so glad that you did this, because I feel like every woman, especially who speaks openly of abuse, liberates another, you know, and begins to take the shame away from that. And I want to go back to mysticism. This is the thing I am most excited to talk to you about. So there's a moment in the very early pages of your book where you talk about being a very traumatized but an extremely intelligent and already expert at compartmentalizing child of a great deal of violence, right? What I saw you as was a very watchful, very, you know, you'd figured out what you needed to do to survive, but like, you know, very vigilant in order to get through the day-to-day terrorism that was happening in your house. And there's a moment where you're in a room and you're having this rare moment of silence because your house was not a safe or silent or peaceful home. And you describe what can only be described as a benediction or a mystical visitation from a deeply loving source that came to you, and I'll let you take the story from there, and gave you a very important message. And I'm wondering if you would share that with us.
Yeah, and I was young. I was around 7 years old, and I was playing with my little ponies in the fish, and I was alone. It was totally peaceful, and I felt a presence. I didn't see anything, but I felt a presence and received a message. And the voice said to me that I would be safe, that my family, and I considered my family myself, my mother, my brother, my sister, that we would survive, that we would live, survive, and also that I had to, because I was supposed to go on to help many people. And I swear, I've remembered that ever then. It got me through my childhood. It got me through high school. I revisited it even after when I was in college. And I felt that voice saved me quite literally, and gave me a blessing and a promise. And I felt I agreed at that moment to answer that calling, to live up to it, answer it. And again, it's kept me on path and on purpose.
If anybody's just joining us, because I know people are dipping in and out, we're talking about this beautiful book, The Beauty in Breaking by Dr. Michelle Harper. She's an ER doctor and an extraordinary writer. Okay, so when I read that, I thought, oh, she's on the team. This is a code that my friend Martha Beck, do you know Martha Beck? She's a writer, and actually she's the person for whom the word life coach was first invented. Like you, a Harvard graduate, and a dear friend of mine. She's like Oprah Winfrey's life coach. She's got a column for O Magazine. She's a wonderful human being, and she introduced me to this idea of the team. And the team are people who heard what you heard. The team are people who have some sort of a mystical connection to an inexplicable otherworldly source that came to them maybe once, maybe frequently, to say, hey, listen, there's more going on here than you can see, and we've got work for you to do. And you said yes to the work, and with that, yes, you joined the team. So I salute you as a fellow team member. And what made Martha think of this, there's a story I want to tell because it relates to this. When Martha was at Harvard getting her sociology degree, she was doing a paper on women who had infiltrated fields where there were not very many women. Women not unlike yourself, who had risen to the top of fields where women typically were not welcomed, where life was not made easy for women. And she was fascinated with how these women had done that. And so she was interviewing them, and she would ask them, how did you get here? How are you here? And they would give these answers that were very formulaic about, I worked harder than anyone else, or I made good contacts. I was always the first one at work, and she was listening to this thinking, these sound like stock answers from Wharton Business School. This doesn't answer my real question, and she just kept pushing and saying, but no, really, why are you here? How did you get here? And then every single one of these women at some point in the interview would look over her shoulder to make sure she was alone, lean over to Martha, say, can you turn that microphone off, please? And then say, do you want to hear the real story? And then they would describe a mystical encounter like you just described, where they would say, I had a vision. I heard a voice. I had a dream. My grandmother came to me and gave me a message from beyond the grave. Like something that is absolutely empirically, scientifically unprovable. And yet each one of those women had decided to build, quite simply, their entire life based on that. And those women, and that's what had gotten them to where they'd gotten in life. And it's what had gotten them through everything in life, because they never forgot that message that came to them at a critical time. I felt so many times in this book that you were guided as much by your medical expertise, your education, and your experience as by your intuition. Right. So many moments in this book, you saved somebody's life, or made a human connection with them at a level that was beyond what was necessary, because some voice, and I wonder if you think of it as the same one, or is it how do you make sense of this? You're a scientist. You work in science. How do you make sense of all of this?
I have to be honest, I don't think this is explained by science. I just don't. Yeah. I mean, there's just so much more. Yes, I have to utilize science, but there's more than that. I mean, and that voice, that message, and if it's more than one, I don't think so, because I still get messages like that, or like after my grandmother passed away, like I might just sense like the scent. It would just waft through my condo. And I live in an entirely different state than where she lived. So it would be impossible otherwise, or just messages. That's one of the reasons why I love going on walks. And I do walking meditation, because as I'm going, I'll get messages when I'm just outside. And then when it comes to patients, I had an experience with a patient around 2 years old, and you'll probably remember this one. Mm. She came in, it seemed like she was having a seizure. And sometimes after a seizure, someone may not come to right away. They'll still be in a stupor. But these kind of seizures in little kids that happen with fever, they're typically safe. Not always. I'm not giving you medical advice, but they're pretty safe. Usually everyone's fine. But there was something about her. She looked perfect. Her skin was perfect, heart and lungs, everything about her physical exam was fine. No, she wasn't coming to, so we were going to have to transfer her to pediatric hospital because we didn't admit peds where we were. I got my, the requisite tests before transfer. And I ordered a test she didn't need, the liver function studies test. It wasn't necessary. I was like, you know what? I don't, just leave it, whatever. It doesn't really matter. Extra information. The team packed her up to go, and she was out the door, and I got a call from the radiologist. Not all the results were back, but the radiologist called and said, there is no pneumonia. You did an x-ray just to look for infection. There is none, but there's some broken ribs. They don't necessarily look new, different phases of healing. And then I saw in the blood work, the liver tests were abnormal, very high. And all of a sudden I thought, oh my God, she's been beaten and the liver tests are abnormal because her liver's bruised and it's bleeding. And you couldn't see it on the surface. And I couldn't prove it. But I picked up the phone. The child was already out the door on the way to the other hospital. And I spoke to the accepting attending and I told her what happened. I think this is a trauma case. I'm sorry, but I think she needs to be worked up for trauma. She's beaten. That's why she's not waking up. And I found later that that's exactly what happened, that it was an abuse case. And she had bleeding not only in her liver, but her brain and a big case. And she was helped, thank goodness. But
she was with her father.
Right.
Who was very loving in your presence and very concerned in your presence with her.
Yes.
And I'm assuming was the...
it turned out, yes, he was the person who beat her. I don't know who else was involved, but he was arrested for the abuse. But and everything looked appropriate. Like there was no red flags. It was just a sense. And I feel like that can happen where like one person, one's body, one's spirit can call out to another. And if we're open, we can receive the message and act on it.
Did they teach you that at Harvard Medical School, Michelle?
Okay. Undergrad. Sorry. Harvard undergrad. They changed the name of my medical school, Stony Brook Renaissance something or other. But no, that is not.
I'm saying that because what I marvel at is that what I delight in and I'm grateful for is that they didn't knock it out of you at Harvard Medical School. Harvard, sorry. But that somehow you were able to hold on to that connection with divine intuition, even as you were getting, like an advanced degree in the most modern science that the world has to offer. That seems miraculous as well. And the fact that all the trauma that you've continued to witness has still managed to not close that channel in you, where you're still able to respond at that level to your patients, just also seems miraculous and extraordinary to me. You're an extraordinary human being, Michelle Harper.
Thank you so much. You too. That's why I love being in conversation with you. With the team.
With the team. I love the only thing I ever want to talk about, the only people I ever want to talk to are on the team, and the only things I ever want to talk about is this, like the mystery of all of that cannot be seen and yet seems to be the most important aspect of the healing that you do. The moment in the book where you discuss discharging a psychiatric patient from the Veterans Hospital where you were working, who had been in treatment for alcohol abuse and was leaving out into the world. Vicky Honor, you call her in the book, and who, was doing well and was a veteran and had been on tour in Afghanistan and had a drinking problem, and all she needed was for you to kind of say that she was mentally and physically able to go out in the world. And you got doorknobbed. It's something that a friend of mine invented this term for when your hand is on the doorknob and you're about to leave a room, but something makes you turn around and go back in because your work isn't finished. And you turned around knowing that your work with her wasn't finished and asked her what had happened to her in Afghanistan. And if you don't mind sharing that story and why your intuition told you that this patient needed more than just a medical discharge that day. It's I think the most beautiful part of the entire book.
Yeah, thank you, because this interaction for me is really important and really special. And all she needed was clearance, meaning someone to say medically, okay, she can start with her sober house, her new team, her system. And as I was leaving the room, she had mentioned she was just recovering from a lot, and drinking was the way for her to deal with her trauma she had been through. Yes, there was some childhood trauma, but there was other trauma too. And she really put on a good face, a good show. I could tell she was trying, she was committed, focused on the end game of getting better. So I was leaving. It was the end of my shift. I had to go home. I was already running late. But I turned around because as I was leaving, something felt that if I don't ask, I'll be doing what everybody did, but ignoring this, being complicit in the silence, what she's been through. So I had to ask. So I turned around and asked her if she'd mentioned trauma, if she wouldn't mind if she wanted to disclose what that was. And then she went on to tell me how, while she was stationed overseas, she was raped by not only her supervisor in the military, but then subsequently a colleague there as well. And not only was she raped by these people, and it was handled terribly at the time in the military, and they went on to harass and trying to ruin her in every way. She wanted to go home to visit her grandmother, excuse me, to honor her grandmother because she had passed away, and that was the one person she had in this world. And they said they mixed up the paperwork, so no, she couldn't go home for the funeral. And so she stayed because she had no choice. And then after this deployment was over, then they tried to ruin her career so she wouldn't get any benefits. So not only had they, in this crime, these repeated crimes against her, not only had they violated her body, her spirit, but now they were trying to take away her livelihood as well. So I was seeing her. She was a new team. They were restoring her record. There was no sense that there was any justice enacted against the men who had done this to her or the system that made it possible. But as we were talking, she did express a sense of relief that someone else had spoken to her. She told me that she had never gotten the chance to really tell all of that story to anyone. And she was beginning her process of healing, and that was the first time she let it all out and felt supported in doing so. So for me, it was important because, you know, while she's there, you know, the reason I tell this story is while she's there trying to survive, I can be there, support her in that process. The rest of us can be there to make changes, to amplify the system, to stop the silencing and change the systems that create this. And one of the reasons why it was so important for me to tell that story is I saw many women like Miss Honor, and I'm just sick to my heart. I hear the story about Vanessa Guillen. This is our work to make the changes while they try and survive.
There's a moment in your book where you tell the story of, and also human being to human being, just thank you for going back and talking to her. It's astonishing to me that in all of those years after those crimes and trauma, nobody had just taken a minute to say, do you want to tell me what happened?
Yeah.
It just seems like the most fundamental missing piece. There's a part in your book where you get a young man comes in and he's been beaten. This is the story of Gabriel. So each one of the chapters in this book is an essay about a particular patient or sometimes two patients and how their stories converged. It's more than a case history. They're almost like spiritual histories of the person and of how meeting this person changed you. So this is a story that you tell of a young man who was in that very brutal neighborhood in the South Bronx and he was a good student and a good kid, and his parents had gotten him a new pair of sneakers to reward him for his good grades, and he had been beaten defending those sneakers from a tougher kid, maybe a gang member who had wanted to take them. You also intuited, again, you know, in your conversation with Gabriel, that he kept saying, I'm going to take care of it, don't worry, it's fine. Like, and you gathered that what he meant was he was going to exact revenge. And you asked him if he had a weapon to do so, because if so, you would have to report him to social services if you feel like somebody's life might be in danger. And he admitted that he had a gun, or said that he had a gun, and that he was going to take care of this bully. And you brought in I guessed from, I don't know whether she was older, it felt like she was older, or if she wasn't older, she was just older in years of experience, an older social worker who came in, and there's this section in the book where she just breaks it down for you because you don't understand the world as much as she does. And she says, Michelle, when you're at war, the rules are different. The members of this family, they're soldiers in a way. They're fighting for their families. The frame of reference in war is different. The atrocities of a war zone are a normal part of life. And you do what you have to do to survive, to make it home. These are good people. None of this is right. Gabriel shouldn't think it's okay to use a gun. He shouldn't feel he has to use a gun to feel safe at school. Schools should be safe. And then she sighed and said, okay, child. Anyway, there's no proof this kid really has access to a gun. No one in his family has one. I'll write up my report. We'll check on the family. There's nothing else to do here. She shook her head and smiled. Unless the ER can give these people jobs that are actually living wage and safe places to live. Can we do that, Doc? She asks. It just brings me to tears again reading it.
Yeah.
How optimistic are you about our country right now? How optimistic are you about there ever being a change where perhaps families like Gabriel's can have a chance?
Do you know, okay, so I'm realistic. I'm an occasional optimist, as I have on my Facebook bio. but it's true. I am optimistic. I don't believe in any quick fixes. There are. These are brambly. They're difficult, which is why I wanted to write that story. But I believe change is possible. And this particular moment in time has a different quality towards it, has a different energy. And so I believe, I really do. And
I
thank God.
feel that way too, but I wanted to check it with another team
Yeah,
member.
I do. Thank God. I mean, because things are so tough right now. Thank God I believe. How else could I get up in the morning? I swear to you. So no. No, I do.
Yeah, I feel it. And I've been especially asking a lot of older people, and a lot of older people who've spent their lives in social justice or in social work, or, I've been saying, like, does this feel different? Because I know it feels different to me, but I also know that I live in a bubble of privilege, right? So I want to check in with people who don't live in a bubble of privilege and say, this feels different. This moment feels different. And I'm wondering if you can articulate what it is that you're seeing that gives you that hope.
One thing I'm seeing is an openness to discussion in a way, and self-inquiry in a way I haven't seen before. I mean, it's not everybody, and I don't want to overstate it. I mean, this is going to be a lifetime of work, just steady, constant pressure, dedication that will have to continue long after both of us are gone. Okay, so let me just put it in that context. But there is a difference in physician groups I'm part of. I'm seeing a lot of women, for example, white women asking themselves, wait a second, do I do this microaggression you're mentioning? A recent article I wrote, somebody circulated, and they were asking, wait, I think I might do that. How do I stop doing that and make changes? I'm seeing that happen on a level I have not seen ever before in medicine, for example, as I talk about these groups. So something is sticking this time in a way that it hasn't before.
Yeah. There is an awakening happening, it does feel. I think it's also some political figures have been very helpful about revealing how deep and ugly the rot is, to the point that we can't ignore it anymore. We can't pretend that the maggots aren't under the surface of the skin anymore, because we've seen them having press conferences every day. It's like, just brings the pain and the horror kind of right up to the
after opportunity. I mean, even everything is being laid bare. I mean, even with coronavirus, the fact people losing their jobs, record unemployment, which then also means record uninsured during a pandemic. I mean, we can't function this way as a society where healthcare is a privilege and not a right. We can't function where now everyone may not be able to afford to buy a meal. So it's just layers and layers are being revealed.
If anybody's just jumping in and joining us, we're speaking with Dr. Michelle Harper. She is the author of this exquisite book called The Beauty in Breaking. You have a very high tolerance for pain in terms of what you're able to, you talk about how both medical school and growing up in an abusive household taught you how to compartmentalize. You're able to do this harrowing work of being an ER doctor, because you're able to compartmentalize your own emotions and put them away and focus on the patient at hand. You also have a lot of spiritual practices that seem to bolster you, that you write about beautifully in the book as well, of what meditation means to you, what yoga means to you, how you take care of your own health. But you recently wrote an article in Medium about how when this coronavirus, when COVID-19 is over, there are going to be you predict that there are going to be a lot of healthcare professionals who are not going to return to their jobs because they've frankly been over-traumatized. You also speak in the book, I learned things that I never knew about how dangerous your job is in terms of being on the receiving end of assault. The statistics about how healthcare professionals are 5 times more likely to be victims of assault than all the other professions combined. And that the statistic that just blew my mind, that said that 20% of nurses reported having been assaulted at least 20 times in the last 3 years. So even before the pandemic came, you were in a field where what was being asked of people on a daily basis, what they were being asked to endure just to go to work, their safety and the hours that they keep and the trauma that they witness, and having to make the judgment calls that they have to make, having to tell family members that their beloveds have died. I mean, on a normal Tuesday, very few of us could do what you do. And then the pandemic came and there was no more such thing as a normal Tuesday. And you were in Philadelphia where there was quite a high, there was, back in March, things were bad. Can you speak more to that? Have you heard from other medical professionals who are saying that they've, even as tough and strong and compartmentalized as they've been able to be, that there has to be a place where trauma gets to be so much that you just can't keep shaking it off? How are you handling that? Do you ever think you'll leave medicine? Speak freely. Yeah. Take it from there.
Yeah. People really are exhausted. And it's hard to do this work when you're unsupported. So dealing with everything pre-pandemic and then now being in a situation, and I work clinically in Jersey. Right now there's a lull. We're bracing though for when the lull goes away again. But working under those circumstances and then having pay cuts and furloughs and healthcare professionals being fired, expected to work long hours and being understaffed or working ill even. And I took care of someone who kept apologizing. He was a technician. He didn't work in my hospital, different one, but I had to admit him back to the hospital. He just left the intensive care unit, but was sick again, couldn't breathe. His heart rate was high, his oxygen was low, and kept apologizing because his phone kept ringing. And he said, I'm sorry, but they know I'm sick at work, but we're all sick at work and they need me to come back and they need me to work. So it just leaves one feeling desperate. And as I have said many times, just feeling more disposable than our protective equipment.
Oh.
So yes, people are looking for a way out. Now, how I feel personally is it is very demoralizing. I personally don't feel like my time in medicine is done yet. I'm here for the mission. I want to continue writing. There's a lot I want to accomplish on that path. And with medicine as well, I'm just not done. I have to be there for my patients, my people. I mean, I love working in underserved communities, traditionally underserved communities, predominantly Black and brown and immigrant and financially under-resourced. It's what I need to do. It lights up my soul, just like writing does now also. So I'm not done yet. And yes, I have to protect myself and recharge. So there's the physical practice of yoga and meditation and prayer. I'm not religious, but I'm spiritual, and I feel a deep connection to those practices. And if I didn't do them, I would lose my mind and then I wouldn't be on the team anymore. So I have that, and it keeps me grounded. Yeah. And what I've said, coaching and therapy, it can be really difficult, so difficult to find a good therapist. But I always want to make a mention of that because at different points in my life, it's been a real boon because there's only so much. I mean, you can talk to friends and family. It's good to have someone outside of your immediate circle where you can just be totally honest with. So
Yeah.
those are helpful points in my life also. And so these are things I do because I need to continue on this path.
Yeah, you say in the book that you have a calling for healing, that's your calling, and you can't argue with that. And I know what it is to have a calling. I know what it is to feel like I work for them, like I work for the mothership, and I'll be told when it's time for me to do whatever it is they've got me here to do, and if that calling should ever end, I'll be notified. um, and in the meantime, I just do as I'm told, right? And so when you say like my mission's not over, I absolutely 100% understand. I feel like I got a much easier mission than you got. I got a much easier mission than you got, but I'm so grateful that you do it. And when you speak about the difference, how important spirituality is in your life, I'm really glad that you distinguish the difference between spirituality and religion. I have a friend who's in AA, and he sponsors 40 or 50 people. He's one of these great healers of human souls, and he always says the difference between spirituality and religion is that religion is for people who are afraid of going to hell, and spirituality is for people who have already been there. And you, not only have you been there, you kind of put your scrubs on and go back in there.
Condo.
I wondered if if you've heard anything about your book possibly being assigned in medical schools. Is that a thing that happens to broaden the curriculum? I just feel like I would be so happy if my future doctors were reading this book. And the book, for those of you who are still joining us, we're talking to Dr. Michelle Harper, and her book is called The Beauty in Breaking. Have you heard anything along those lines?
I know we've discussed there's a program where there's a collaboration where different, okay, don't yell at me if I'm misquoting this, Ashley, but schools will come and pick books to be part of their curriculums.
Yeah.
I don't believe that's specifically medical schools, but I thought about this a lot, and I
Yeah.
think it would be really important work to be included in medical education. So there will be discussions, I'm sure.
Yeah, for so many reasons. If you had three things that you could change, that you could just sort of wave a magic wand and change, and I know you're a realist.
Yes.
I know you're a realist as well as a mystic, but what are the three sort of immediate things that you see where you're like, God, if we could just like make these simple changes to be able to better serve the most underserved and vulnerable members of our society, what would you suggest those to be?
So three changes. I have a magic wand, so I'm gonna think big on this. And I'm gonna say just a living wage so that if a person works full time, they can afford to live on one job. Healthcare for everyone, so you don't have to worry about if you're sick, what are you going to do? Will anyone take care of me? Can I work? Can I take care of my friends or family? So healthcare and free education also. Education, healthcare, living wage. Because I have a magic wand.
Vote for Dr. Michelle Harper, everybody. A vote for Dr. Michelle Harper is a vote for a living wage, free healthcare, free education for all. I am with you. I sign off on that as well. Let us hope that these things come, in the richest, most powerful country that the world has ever seen. It doesn't seem like these things should be so far out of reach. And I want to close by just asking you if you would tell the story of the caterpillar goo. For those who don't actually know what real transformation entails, I was amazed by this, and I would love it if you could share it with everybody.
So I didn't realize this. And I was on a flight pre-COVID when it was a little relaxing to fly. And I don't know why. I'm one of these kind of dorky, nerdy people who that the magazine in the pocket on the airplane, I'll always look through it. I'm like, put it there. It's probably important. Something's in there that could save my life. But I'll flick through. And I saw the story of the caterpillar transformation. And I learned that in the life cycle of a caterpillar, it eats and eats and eats, and then it goes into its cocoon, where it literally breaks down to goo before it becomes a butterfly. And I was trying to do research on this and to see why, because it doesn't really make sense that a formed object would just dissolve to nothing. And it's not well understood, but apparently it is required that must happen, and then it comes out a butterfly. And for me, that story, I was like, you know what? This in-flight magazine has delivered. After all these years, the story changed my life. And I thought to myself, well, now it makes sense that we go through these traumatizing, not I don't romanticize trauma, but these terrifying, heartbreaking experiences where we wonder if we'll ever breathe again, if we will survive. But that's exactly how transformation often works, that we will not only survive, but we'll be more resilient and stronger and more beautiful, like the caterpillar.
It's so amazing. I mean, this was amazing information for me to take in too. A caterpillar doesn't go hide in a little safe house and grow wings. It dissolves down into a mucus of its pure genetic matter where it's unrecognizable as anything, you know, and then that mucus reorganizes itself into something completely different. I mean,
Exactly.
just incredible. And it reminded me of when my partner Rhea was dying of pancreatic and liver cancer, which was bad enough. The love of my life and the most important person in my world, and I was her caregiver, and I had dropped everything to take care of her. She also she was had been an addict. She'd been in recovery for 19 years, but when she was dying, she picked up her addiction again, and went fully back into being a heroin and cocaine addict. That I wasn't expecting. You know, I went into it ready to be a caregiver for a hospice patient. I didn't go into it ready to be like in the middle of Sid and Nancy, which is what it turned into. I mean, it was just so harrowing. And there was nothing in me that was prepared for that. And I remember walking down the street one day in the East Village, and I was praying a lot during those years. And I started praying on foot, which is where, like you, when you talk about walking meditation, walking prayer. And then the weirdest prayer came out of me because I felt like I was being destroyed by this situation emotionally, financially. You know, like all of a sudden she had a $600 a day cocaine habit. I was like, God, what do you do? Like, how do you handle this? Like, I've never been in this situation. And I found myself praying. The strangest thing came out of my mouth. And I said right there on East 9th Street to God, whatever you're doing to me in this, make it even worse. Just go ahead and destroy me, because I know that out of this something is going to come, but go ahead and just grind me into dust. Just don't do it halfway. Like, just let's do this. Like, let's do this, because I actually believe that something is going to come from all of this that's going to be to the good. And I found myself saying that, and I was like, what are you asking for? You know, but when I read that part of your book, I was like, oh, I was asking to be disintegrated into the goo of nothingness and total obliteration, so that I could then bloom on the other side as something else. It's a weird prayer. I can't tell anybody to go ahead and do that, but I get it. I get it when you say that. I would never wish suffering on anybody. I would never wish trauma and horror on anybody. And yet, every single person I know who is an extraordinary human being went through that, came out of it as something very beautiful on the other side. Yeah. Out of which we can say something very interesting is happening here on this planet. And maybe that's what our culture has to do right now.
Right.
We've got to turn into goo.
Exactly.
Into butterfly goo. I love you, Michelle. You're awesome.
Thank you. I love you
I'm
too.
glad that you live near me. I wish that it were better times. I would next time I come to Philadelphia, maybe we can have a socially safe cup of coffee somewhere.
I would love to.
Outside. I just think I think you're really an extraordinary person, very obviously a team member. And I'm so grateful that that little traumatized, battered, terrified, very bright, watchful child listened to the command that said, you will heal people, because you do, not only with your work as a doctor, but with your work as a writer, and just your very way of being. You are healing on 2 feet. The book, everybody, is called The Beauty in Breaking. It's by Dr. Michelle Harper. She's extraordinary, as you can plainly see. Be safe, take care of yourself, and I hope that we meet again someday.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much. It's wonderful.
Take care. Bye.